ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures.
Hello, and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This week, we are looking at Baz Luhrmann's Elvis.
Hey, but before we begin, if you haven't subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, why don't you just go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Won't cost you any money whatsoever. And while you're there, go ahead and ding the bell right next to it. And that way you'll be notified every time we release a video. And as just a reminder, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers, so you have been warned. James?
Okay, so Elvis, what is there to say? I remember reading on Twitter, I think it was yesterday or the day before, someone just said that they'd had the revelation that they realized everybody knows who Elvis is. He's just one of those people that you don't really need to introduce Elvis as a character, as a persona, as a celebrity. Everybody kind of knows who you're talking about. And so therefore a film about Elvis, you kind of know what you're getting into. It's Baz Luhrmann, who similarly, you kind of already know what the style of a Baz Luhrmann movie is going to be. It's bright, it's shiny, it's chaotic, it's gaudy, it's over the top, it's brightly colored, it's all singing, it's all dancing. Arguably, you could say, there is nobody better suited to bring an Elvis Presley story to the screen. And what the film does is it comes from the perspective of Colonel Tom Parker, played here by Tom Hanks, on his deathbed in the late 90s, looking back over the career of Elvis, fully aware of the fact that he has been demonized, that Tom Parker has been demonized, and that he is seen as, not only the exploiter of Elvis and his music and his legacy, but also responsible for his death to one degree or another. And he's looking back and goes, was I really to blame for all of this? And, in flashback, we see essentially Elvis's rise and fall, really, from beginning to the end. Brilliantly, I'm going to say right out of the gate, played by Austin Butler.
No, absolutely. Everything about Elvis. I grew up with Elvis. I'm a 55-year-old American. I remember being on our vacation, a road trip out west from Michigan in August of 1977, when it came through the radio that Elvis Presley had died. And, we're all just aghast that this is Elvis is Elvis. He's bigger than life. And that's why when you mentioned about Baz Luhrmann being the natural director to bring this kind of story to life, of course he is. I mean, Elvis Presley is the pink Cadillac, Graceland, Las Vegas. Everything's big. Everything's showy. Everything is a costume with flares on it. Of course, Baz Luhrmann is just the natural connection point here. Having said this, and it's curious that I read where Baz Luhrmann said there is a 4-hour version cut of this film that's out there. I want to see the 4-hour version, because what inhibits this film is not anything to do with Baz Luhrmann. It's just that no director can take 2.5 hours and tell the full scope of this man's existence. And he only lived to 42. That's what's so big about Elvis. I mean, this is a guy who was born into poverty in the Deep South, who becomes this, rock star, who goes off to the military, marries Priscilla Presley, comes back, becomes a movie star, becomes a Vegas attraction, and a national icon. So how do you tell all of that in 2.5 hours? You don't. So what you end up getting is these small vignettes. And so you lose some of the connection points. You want more of these vignettes to be fleshed out and to know more about what happens here. There are so many times in this film, James, where, Luhrmann just focuses in on one area. And then I want to stay in this scene. I want to stay in this story. I want to stay in this moment of life. And I want to know more about how this played out and how this interacted with this. But no, we don't have time for this. We got to jump on. We got to keep moving, keep moving. You almost feel like you're on a tour at Graceland and you want to pause for a moment in a certain room, but the tour guide's going, sorry, got to keep moving, keep moving. And that's where I felt in this film was the constant, okay, now, have you seen enough? Got to keep moving. And that's where this movie, for me, I've got a lot to praise about it. That was the element that left me a little bit disappointed. But again, it's nobody's fault, because I don't think anybody would be able to do it unless you did a 10-hour miniseries. I would love, be interesting to see if Luhrmann had been able to take that on. Baz Luhrmann brings you Elvis, the limited series, 10 hours, where we basically tell the story, but just allow it to unfold in a much more natural and where we can enjoy it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, the sad truth of that is you'd still get people going, oh, well, why didn't they do the bit with the thing and the guy and, you know, when he did this? Because he's one of these celebrities, maybe the first ever, that really kind of lived his life in the public eye. You know, everybody kind of knew everything, or everything about him was chronicled. I mean, he was only 42 when he died, but I think more than half his life was spent in the public eye. You know, he first came to prominence in the early 50s, and then he died in 77. So it's more than 20 years that he was out there. And he did very quickly become this kind of mythic, legendary character where everybody had a story about, you know, Elvis did this and Elvis did this. And there was as much myth building as there was a sort of real reportage of what happened. And so everybody kind of knows everything about Elvis, or everybody has their favorite bit about the Elvis legend. And so I think it would be nigh on impossible, unless your movie was 42 years long, to have everything in there that everybody wanted to appease everybody. So instead, what you get is you get this sort of whirlwind, kaleidoscopic scrapbook of highlights. Is everything in there? No, of course it isn't. And yeah, like you say, he said there's a 4-hour cut, and I would watch that in a heartbeat. I really hope that does come out one day, because there are bits that are missing, obviously, like that first performance on the Ed Sullivan Show, or the time that he met with Nixon, and you know, things like that aren't in there. Apparently they've been filmed, but there just isn't time for any of that. But I don't mind, because Elvis lived the life that he lived, and because he was this sort of known entity, or sort of had this celebrity status for so long, his timeline is all jumbled up for everybody anyway. You know, everybody knows stories about Elvis, but you're not entirely sure what order they came in or how things developed. So it kind of makes sense in a way that it's like, oh, and there's this thing about Elvis and this thing about Elvis, and they're coming at you almost out of order, just as the mood takes it. It also echoes his sort of musical roots and sensibilities. You know, I really like the way that the film lent into his influences, you know, gospel music and blues and all of that stuff, but they're kind of introduced almost seemingly at random, organically, you know, just coming out of the sides, coming out of the wings when it felt right. And that kind of, for me, reflected just that he was being influenced by, he was being seen by everybody at all times. You know, he was being pulled in 8 different directions at the same time, and he was pulling influences and gaining influence from all over as well. So that could just sound like me making excuses for the fact that the film is a big, bloated, chaotic mess. But hey, so was Elvis, and right. so that's okay, you know. And it kind of worked for me.
Yeah, you mentioned about the inclusion of his gospel influences, and I thought that really worked. I mean, myself coming from a faith-based background, I was well aware from a young boy about the impact that Elvis's faith had on him in his life, despite all the challenges he had and the temptations of the world, the girls and the alcohol and the drugs. You know, my wife comes from the South, and you cannot have someone from that culture without having that expression of how much that religious environment permeates the atmosphere of what incubated Elvis. And what's interesting, and something I caught that I bet you 99% of watchers of this film would not have caught, was when he's preparing for his Vegas show and he's talking about possible opening acts. He says, oh, we're going to have the Imperials. We're going to be having the Imperials open for us. Now, that would have blown by most people, and I'm going to assume it blew by you.
It did blow by me. I don't know what you're talking about.
The Imperials are one of the biggest gospel groups of all times. I've been a fan of them since I was a young boy. I was listening to them within the month. I've got a playlist on Spotify of the Imperials, and familiar with their biography or their history. They would always have in their history and opened for Elvis Presley, or partner, or performed alongside Elvis Presley. And I always thought, well, that would have been interesting. I never got to see that. What did that look like? Where did that occur? It was just always a little tidbit that I would see in the the bio of the Imperials. And then when Elvis says, "Oh, we're going to have the Imperials," and I was like, "Oh yes, of course, I know that."
Oh, that's excellent, because I like that you do get a glimpse of these other acts, and that when he had his break at the Louisiana Hay.
Yes.
What's it called?
Yeah. The Louisiana hoedown, whatever it was. And was it Hank Snow? Was the
Hank Snow, played by David Wenham.
Mm-hmm.
He's quite a big Australian actor who pops up a lot in Baz Luhrmann stuff. That he was the big act, and that sequence when Elvis comes on, everyone's like, "We're here for the guy with the banjo," So what is this what's this boy bringing? And you've got all these young women in the audience, and then as soon as he starts singing, they're just like overcome. It's like the spirit has taken them. The Lord has it was nicely mirrored with the gospel scenes, and the way that he was being like, the spirit within him was being taken or whatever. And these girls are reacting in the same way, although, obviously it's a very, very different response that they're having, but they don't know what it is. And they're being taken by surprise by it, and they don't know how to articulate it or how to deal with it. And I thought that was great, because that perfectly illustrates the impact that he had, and how he revolutionized everything in a moment.
Well, we forget as modern audiences who have become desensitized by and large to sex and violence being portrayed on screen or in performances. The idea of Elvis shaking his goods below the belt, that was, we saw the ramifications of it. America at certain times and in certain states, you're in danger of being arrested for that. There was all kinds of rules that we would look at now and going, oh, very puritanical and all this, but you got to see this time period. And then how much, and this is something that Baz Luhrmann, I think, needed to include, because there's been a lot of controversy about this over the last few years, is how much influence Elvis got from Black gospel and Black African-American entertainers of that time, of which a lot of attribution was not given for many, many years. And so there was a lot of appropriation, accusations made. So the movie does a really good job, I thought, of showing not only where a lot of Elvis's inspiration came from, but the relationships he fostered, such as with B.B. King. There was an ease that he seemed to have with the African-American community that was probably against the grain of a lot of white America in the 50s.
Yeah, no, I do like how it illustrates that the reason why it might have gone unadvertised for a long time, that these were his influences. This is where he was getting his ideas from, or is because they were so hugely unpopular, that he was bridging this gap between sort of the white people and the Black community at a time when in numerous states that segregation was still in place and all the rest of it. And here was this white boy getting up on stage and going, no, it's all good. It's all great. Yeah. I'm going to sing it to you because you won't listen to them sing it, almost. And how it really upset all these sort of far right Confederate style, racist groups. And I think it really does a good job of contextualizing all of that stuff.
Well, it even shows
for a modern audience.
It really shows even how Colonel Parker was not interested in him, thinking he was just another Black reformer. Oh, he's white. Suddenly the radar pops up, and he's seeing money bags. He's seeing,
Yeah, I mean, the film definitely portrays Parker's motivation there, not as prejudiced, but just as it's a dead end financially. Yeah, because he won't be put on the radio, he won't be put on stage. How true all that is, we're not sure, because I think the representation of Parker here is somewhat affectionate. I think they go to some degree to be like, he was kind of weird and strange, and he took advantage of Elvis and all the rest of it. But you get the impression that the film's like, but it wasn't all bad.
Well, and if they wanted to portray him as all bad, you wouldn't have had Tom Hanks portraying him, because Tom Hanks, even when he's playing a little bit of a muddied character, can't, because he's Tom Hanks. The guy exudes Boy Scouts. So, yes, he's the perfect character to put into that role. If you want to have a character who is largely unsympathetic, have a measure of sympathy for from the audience. It was interesting that I think Priscilla Presley, when I was reading up some the responses of the Presley family to this film, was that something along the lines of Colonel Parker was two different types of people. There was some good and bad there. There was, so, to make him out as purely the villain would have probably been disingenuous. And so to have Tom Hanks come across and be this character that is largely portrayed as the adversity in this film, but with a measure of humanity.
Yeah, no, I think it was actually Tom Hanks. I think I saw him say in an interview recently that they did have a version of the script ready to go, and in which Tom Parker was just this villainous character. And then when he met with Priscilla Presley and the rest of the family, they told him stories about Parker that were conflicted with that, and they were like, "Oh no, yeah, he wasn't just this guy. He also was, and all these positive things." So they actually had to kind of go back and sort of reconfigure the script to some degree.
Like most of reality, it's
slightly more
black and white.
Yes.
It's not on or off. There's nuance.
Yeah, and so it was kind of great that they managed to do that, or that they made the effort to do that, because that would have obviously been the easy way to go, just Colonel Tom Parker, bad guy.
Well, James, at this point, looking at the time, I'm gonna lob the ball over to the hoop and let you score the points here. Tell me about Austin Butler. How do you think he did?
I think he did fantastically.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I'd seen him in before this was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he plays Tex, one of the guys on the ranch. But I think that's the only thing I'd seen him in so far. So he was kind of a blank slate to me, and I thought he was phenomenal. I mean, I want to preface this by saying I'm not the world's biggest Elvis fan at all. I don't know a ton about Elvis, nor do I really listen to much of his music, on the reg, as they say. But he completely embodied him. He got the essence of him down. And it's not about like looking like him necessarily, but it's about composure. It's about how you sound. It's about how you carry yourself. And I think he did an absolutely phenomenal job here. And I think the fact that we exist in a world where someone like Rami Malek can win the Best Actor Oscar for that performance, that portrayal of Freddie Mercury in a movie like that. Bohemian Rhapsody, I'm not a big fan of Bohemian Rhapsody.
I'm well aware of your thoughts on Bohemian Rhapsody, which I do not share your view on that, but I understand.
The Live Aid section was great.
Yeah.
Would have been better if he was actually singing, but hey. Whereas Austin Butler, at least in the early scenes, is doing all his own singing.
Yes.
Apparently in the later stuff, it's kind of an audio mix of him and Elvis doing it together, because it's slightly more difficult voice. But in a world where Rami Malek can win for that kind of performance, then Austin Butler is clearly a shoo-in, or is going to be definitely in the conversation come the end of the year. And I think it's great, because I think the film lives or dies, obviously, on that performance. And I thought he did for that fantastic job. You forget that you're watching an actor pretending to be Elvis after a while, and he just completely disappeared into the role. I thought he was great.
Yeah, I mean, he is a pretty boy. Elvis was a pretty boy. I mean, this was a performance. I totally agree with you, James. And I think we will be seeing at least an Oscar nomination, if not the gold going to him, because this is typically the type of role that wins people Oscars. There's definitely a track record for this, and I think Austin Butler will be well positioned. He has the support of the Presley family. They all thought the portrayal of him, when you got somebody's wife, somebody's daughter, somebody's granddaughter saying, "Wow," it was like watching my dad or my husband or my grandfather back to life again. I mean, that's got to speak volumes.
Yeah, I mean, really, what more validation do you need?
Yeah,
really.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing is, beyond those two characters, the other players in the film don't get much of a look in. I mean, you got Richard Roxburgh as his dad, Vernon Presley. You've got Olivia de Jong as Priscilla Presley, and you've got like Kelvin Harris Jr. as B.B. King. But no one really has much screen time. No, outside of these two characters. It really is about this relationship. I've heard this film actually being compared favorably as well to Amadeus, which I hadn't thought of. But when I heard that, I was like, that's great. And how the story is told from the point of view of the Salieri character. And Parker is definitely the sort of Salieri character. He frames the narrative, and it's tinged with his own guilt, perhaps, as well.
Right.
But it's very much that. I mean, he obviously, on the one hand, Elvis was a man of the people and sort of felt like owned by his public as much as anyone else. And even by the end, Tom Parker is kind of saying, no, it was kind of you. It was kind of the fans. It was his love for the fans and your love for him that killed him, not me.
Yeah.
He's almost kind of shifting the blame onto us.
Right.
Kind of saying it was you, the demands that you put on Elvis and his willingness to meet those demands, that's what killed him. And you're kind of like, no, it's the 5-year contract you trapped him into in Vegas so you could pay back your gambling debt. But it's an interesting tack to take. But I thought, so it does kind of just focus on this central relationship. But that's fine because the other person in this relationship is me, is us, is the audience. And I thought that worked brilliantly. And I actually think that the film gets better as it goes along. That first hour or so is this kind of like whirlwind kaleidoscope of him, establishing his brand, consistently changing his brand, reimagining himself over and over and over again. And I think it's when he gets back from the army, stops making movies and settles in Vegas. Arguably that was kind of the worst decision he could have ever made. Yeah. That's what trapped him. Once it's ironic that you've got this phrase, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Because for Elvis, it couldn't be more true, because once he got to Vegas, he was kind of trapped there forever.
Yeah, it's unfortunate he never really was able to spread his wings and go to Germany, go to Japan, go to these other countries, which he obviously wanted to do. But what's interesting though is him being so almost uniquely American and him being contained in America, that his legacy is still, it's as big now as it's ever been, James. Last year we did a road trip. My dad passed away and we were traveling through the South. We did hours and we ended up going through Tennessee. My last year, 23-year-old son was just finished university with a music production degree, is a musician, punk rocker, but since he's gone to the UK, he's gone into country, he's gone into all kinds of different music, and he's teaching us about country music on this road trip. And then he puts on Elvis. And I'm thinking, I grew up with Elvis, I like Elvis, but like yourself, I wouldn't consider myself this huge fan. My 23, 24-year-old son is a fan of Elvis. He made us listen to Elvis for a lot of time on this road trip. And he was the one who said, we have to go to Graceland. We've got to go to Graceland. I mean, this is a 23-year-old guy who's from Hong Kong and educated in the UK saying, we got to go to Graceland. And then when you go to Graceland, James, it is huge, not just the house, but the museums and the restaurants and all the little things that they've built, the infrastructure and the little minibuses that cart you around the different places. This has become an enterprise, and there are thousands and thousands of people. We just happen to be there on a weekday in the summer. Granted, summer's probably busier, but I'm just amazed. And the gift shop's not just like this little corner thing where you can get a couple Elvis things. It's a massive superstore of Elvis beach towels and Elvis baseball caps, and it is a marketing, merchandising, merch. And it really hit me how big Elvis is. And watching this film, I'll just kind of end this whole review on my end with Baz Luhrmann captures as much as you can in a film the bigness of Elvis.
Yeah, absolutely true. It was interesting how Colonel Tom Parker is portrayed in the film as kind of coming up with the idea of merchandise. As well, he was, because he just seems any opportunity to wring some more cash out of the guy. He was like, I'm gonna slap your face on this and this and this and this. And so, for good or ill, it's interesting to hear that spirit is living on.
Oh, there's some people making some money. We got the Elvis beach towel.
Well, of course, I would probably do the same.
Yeah.
But it's when you think of Americana, as someone who's not American, when you think of Americana, I guarantee top 3 things you're going to list out are Elvis Presley. He's just quintessentially just American.
He is,
and I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that he never toured. Because Parker was an illegal alien and didn't have a passport and all that kind of thing. And so if he had ever left the US, he wouldn't have been able to come back. That's really the reason. But it meant that he was contained, that you could only see him in America.
Yeah. No, and you got to admire the audacity of Tom Parker too. Illegal alien, couldn't leave the country, and yet he's willing to try to become the manager of arguably the biggest star that there's ever been.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible, and I think a lot of people have learned a lot of cautionary lessons from what Parker managed to get away with.
50%,
50% of everything. Yeah, that's
amazing.
Nuts. That's absolutely nuts.
To be 50% of what Elvis was making and then still being in debt and having gambling issues shows you this guy had a problem.
And then to turn around and slap him with like an $8 million bill at the end of it.
I wanted to know a lot more about that, because I just thought there's a whole story there. And unfortunately, this film does not allow the time to unravel a story I would have loved a lot more information about. Yeah, no, very much so. Very much so. The other thing, I mean, we have to talk about is the music in the film, because obviously you've got a whole load of Elvis performances. You couldn't make this film if they didn't have the rights to the music. I know people have tried to make biopics about pop stars and rock and roll stars and what have you without the rights. There was a recent one about David Bowie that was just, terrible. Yeah. So there's all of that. And the performances that they recreate are great, and they're done superbly well. And it was wonderful to see them. There's also the score, which incorporates elements of Elvis's music in it. It weaves in and out of this kind of orchestral sort of score as well. But then you also have a soundtrack on top of that, which reminded me a bit like his Luhrmann soundtrack to Moulin Rouge, where he takes these sort of famous songs that you kind of already know, and for the most part here, that these are Elvis songs, but then he like revamps them for the modern era with contemporary artists, a lot of hip hop artists, raps artists, and what have you, doing their own version. They've obviously given free rein. It's like, go off book, you don't have to we don't want to cover. This is going to be your whole new thing. And I think it was a big swing. It was a gamble, but I think it works really well, because I think that the moments when Luhrmann chooses to use a bit of Eminem or whomever in there really fits. And it really adds to the kind of eclectic nature of Elvis, the musician and his influences, that they're literally coming from all sides, that he's drawing from Beale Street in Memphis and all the rest of it, and the black influences and the gospel and the blues and the country and all the rest of it. So it kind of makes sense that you would have this sort of eclectic, modern and traditional soundtrack of just sounds and voices, and it works really, really well. James, I couldn't agree more about the soundtrack. The music was spectacular. I mean, I came home and we were listening to some Elvis. It's hard to not come home and watch some Elvis on YouTube, or watch, when you've watched this film, to try to catch up and fill in a little of the blanks on some areas of the film. And anybody who watches this, I think, will be compelled to be listening to some Elvis in the coming days and weeks. But drawing this to a close, obviously we want to review this. I'm going to come right out and say I'd like to use as our instrument the number of pink Cadillacs. Perfect. That works for me. Cadillacs. That is either going to be that or peanut butter and banana sandwiches, but I don't think that figured as prominently in the film as the pink Cadillacs did. No, not really. Yeah. All right, go ahead then. Pink Cadillacs. Okay. All right. Big splashy Baz Luhrmann, as I've said, natural director to tell the story of this big, flashy, larger than life American icon. I loved it. It was great. Not without some minor flaws, which I'm not even going to attribute to Luhrmann. It's just the nature of the beast. I came out of it with that spring in my step. I'm going to give this a solid 4 pink Cadillacs out of 5. I love this film. I can highly recommend it. Excellent. I enjoyed this more than I was expecting to. As I said, I'm not invested as an Elvis fan, especially at all. Not even fully committed Baz Luhrmann fan, if I'm completely honest. He makes some big swings, and sometimes
he misses.
Mhm.
And I felt that in the early stages of this movie, it was a little bit all over the place. It was a little bit chaotic. I think I bought into the spirit of it during the screening, but not immediately. However, by the end, I was all in. I've always preferred older, sweatier Vegas Elvis than the nimble rockabilly Elvis anyway. I'll go for the sequin jumpsuits and the beer belly
Mm-hmm.
and the puffy face every time. And I felt that second half of the film was the stronger half for me.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end, like I said, I don't really listen to Elvis very much ever at all. But I came home and immediately I was like making a playlist, and now I've been listening to it on a loop for days. So I'm right there with you. I'm going to also give Elvis 4 pink Cadillacs out of 5.
Not to draw this out, but you just activated a little thought maybe about big bloated Elvis. And I was thinking watching this, that they, even though they were aging him, obviously with the sideburns, they were really keeping Austin Butler as thin and as pretty as they could, as long as they could. And they really only blowed him for that last musical number. And I thought, I'm pretty sure he's putting on some weight and wasn't looking quite as tight as they were. He was quite into his Vegas gig, and he was still a pretty slim, young looking Elvis. And I thought, oh, that's a stylish choice. We're going to keep him as good looking as possible. And then at the very end, obviously we have to acknowledge he got a little heavy, a little bloated. And I thought, but they kept him pretty as long as they could. I think even well past what it would have been in real life.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But then if you've got Austin Butler in front of your camera, then you probably want to do the same, don't you? Rather than bury him in prosthetics. So
yeah,
all is forgiven.
Hey, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Deep Dive Movie Reviews. As I said at the beginning, if you haven't subscribed, it would be a great help to us if you went ahead and did that. And also, James and I are on Twitter and Instagram, and you'll find details below in the description box about how you can follow us there. James?
That's right. What did you think of Elvis? Let us know in the comments. I know this has divided hardcore Elvis fans. Some are really into it. Some are like, not so much. So where did you fall on this one? Did it make you rush home and listen to Elvis records as well, or not? Let us know. Please leave us a comment, like, subscribe, check out 50 odd other videos that we have. Let us know what you'd like to hear us review in the future. And until then, we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.